I guess we should begin now. It's 12:30. My name is Matthew Radcliffe. I'm going to talk about the type data API in Drupal 8 and my experiences with it. This was originally, I originally submitted this session as a 20-minute presentation to explore my experiences, but they wanted to move all the 20-minute sessions to yesterday, and I couldn't make yesterday for some personal reasons, so I have expanded the session to fill the approximately 40 minutes or so. And I still want to, I think I mentioned in the session description, I wanted the first part to be about my experiences, and then I want to end with kind of opening up to questions or let other people share their experiences if you've worked with this new API in Drupal 8, which I'm not sure if many people have. But if you have worked with it, I feel free to share your own experiences with how you're using type data. If you don't know me, my name is Matthew Radcliffe. My username is mradcliffe on Drupal.org. I work for a small company in Columbus, Ohio, and Athens, Ohio, called Cosada. Just some shameless marketing. Xero is one of our software development projects. Visual programming language has nothing to do with Drupal, but it's just a shameless marketing plug for VJs or performance artists. I find myself working with third-party APIs a lot, and I'm not sure if anyone's integrated a third-party system in this room, but I seem to do it a lot. So one of those APIs is the Xero accounting service, and I might blab on about Xero, but this talk isn't about Xero specifically. I need to go into the background of what I'm doing with type data now, and that is the use case of Xero integration with the Xero.com accounting service. I like Xero accounting, the Xero accounting platform, even if it's .NET. It has a really cool RESTful API. Things that I've done with it is be able to post invoices from open atrium cases, and then automatically then I go into Xero, hit approve, and boom, I'm back to coding. As a small company, we don't really have a dedicated accounting person, so we kind of have to handle our accounting ourselves. And so we have these e-commerce sites, and we want to do a little bank reconciliation, and it was taking a lot of time to match up bank statements to bank transactions. So, code a little commerce module, UberCart module to automatically create those bank transactions, so we could again auto match, and then boom, we're back to coding, doing the things we want to do as a small company. So hopefully that's enough shilling of Xero. The Drupal Association uses it, but not many people use it on Drupal. So going back to Drupal 6 and Drupal 7, I'm currently trying to, in this procedural world, with the Xero module, I'm using a library called PHPUnit, which was recommended by Xero themselves several years ago. It's pretty much abandoned at this point, so my upstream fixes can no longer travel upstream. I have a fork on GitHub that I kind of maintain, I don't want to maintain, and it also, this PHP0 includes OAuth in it, the OAuth class, which is bad because it conflicts with other modules like the OAuth module. The code looks like this. It's terrible. I don't really want to go over this. Let's just move on. That's what I have to deal with. So Xero themselves went off in their own direction. They created their own library. It's a little better, but their coding standards aren't great. I see I have to correct spaces and tabs and indents. I'm like, tried it, contributed it, no thanks. Let's go find something else. So I took a step back and I was thinking, okay, what is my Drupal 7 module doing? What am I really doing here? And I have a couple of things that are very specific. I've got this function called Xero make. It's like theme. So it's like Xero make invoice, and it returns an associative array all set up so I can plug in the values and post it. I have a function, again, a procedural function called Xero query that just passes through and interacts with this PHP Xero library. And then I have some form helper functions and a field type, which I don't really need to worry about because that's pretty much a solved problem. So all that kind of boils down to what I'm really doing is making HTTP OAuth signed requests of Xero API types structured as XML. And luckily for me, there are some components in Drupal 8 and Symfony 2 that solve these problems. And before I got to type data, I had to kind of look through what's solving these problems, how to do it. So going back to when I was looking with these libraries, I started looking at what Drupal 8's offering me. And this was back a couple years ago. So we had Guzzle 3 was included in Drupal core, and that's awesome. We've replaced the procedural Drupal HTTP request with Guzzle, and I don't have to use that crazy PHP library anymore with its own request header and query argument parsing. Guzzle is extendable. I can throw exceptions. I can catch exceptions. I can use OAuth pretty much out of the box. They have plugins, and worrying about OAuth compatibility issues is kind of a solved problem there. I no longer have to worry about that. It does XML and JSON encoding out of the box for simple XML and JSON decode and encode. And then I was looking further into getting off the island, and I jumped down the rabbit hole there, and I found a Symfony 2 bundle called Xero Bundle. So someone's already gone out and done some integration work for me. And it provides a class called Xero Client, which is just an extension of Guzzle Client. So again, we're reusing all this code. I don't have to worry about maintaining that custom procedural, or actually it was not procedural, it was a class. This custom PHP I don't like to maintain. We saw that. And so then I was like, okay, I like this. I really like this. And I had to stop and jump into another rabbit hole. And how do I get to include this code into Drupal 8? And there again, I started learning Drupal 8 by looking into services, the Symfony 2 service classes, and how to set up a factory class to instantiate this third-party class as a service in Drupal 8. And that was cool. That was pretty much straightforward how to do that. And this provided opportunities to start looking at the other Drupal 8 components. And that also led down another rabbit hole of, okay, it's a third-party library, it's a composer, how the heck am I going to get into Drupal? And then I was like, okay, let's not worry about that. There's probably someone else is going to solve that problem, and they're solving that right now. So I was like, oh my god, this is a lot. Let's stop, let's back up. Let's solve the problem that I'm trying to solve with just trying to get used to these Drupal 8 components. And I found another component back in 2012 in Munich. I was sitting around a table of awesome Drupal people talking about web services and RESTful APIs and the HTTP protocol, and the end result of that birds of a feather session was a series of tasks around serializing data. And so Drupal 8 now includes Symfony 2's serializer component and 2 modules that extend serializer in a myriad of ways, including implementing HAL-JSON as a encoding and decoding format and handling how to serialize entities. And the way that it's doing this is through this really low-level API called type data. And type data is basically just a way of describing and managing complex and primitive data types. It's kind of confusing when you're looking in the code. It's like type data, data types, plugin, manager, type data manager. Okay, so hold on, this looked promising. Type data is about describing and managing complex data types, and third-party APIs are all about complex data types. So whether it's the Learning Tools Interoperability Framework, or LTI, which provides a way in the education space to create learning resources and export them around, or Common Cartridge, which is about bundling education and resources, or RESTful accounting APIs, or Twitter or Facebook, type data seems to be the way to go to describe these complex data types. And so then I was looking at, okay, so type data, and I needed to figure out how I was going to integrate this. So Xero provides a lot of types. And I need to describe these types into something Drupal and Symfony understand. I had a couple of questions. I'm like, okay, do I want to go with entities? And at this point, type data, this was still in 2013, I think, type data, entities were type data. They're no longer the case, but I was like, okay, maybe I can use entities. And I didn't really want to deal with storage because I'm dealing with a third-party API. It's already stored on Xero. I don't want to store it again. I just want to get the data and post it. So I was looking for, I was looking at all the things that Xero provides. I've got simple types like amount, tax amount, dates, strings of various things, of various types. Relatively simple, complex data types like an account, and this is like a bank account, a checking account. So in accounting terms, you're moving things around different accounts, and that's how you track cash flow in and out. And then we have like complex data types like invoices, where an invoice can also include other complex data types like accounts, contacts, and line items, which don't live by themselves. They're always a part of an invoice. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of types. I'm going to be late for release. And this is 2013. Oh dear, I'll be late for release. I'm chasing head. Well, we didn't really run into that problem. But I'm still working on it. So I decided to jump down the rabbit hole and chase this white rabbit known as type data. And so that's what I've been kind of doing with the Xero module. And I'll kind of describe some of the problems and some of the code that I've been using. One of the problems, firstly, and this is still the case today, is that there's very little documentation about type data. The page for type data API is here. As you can see, a lot of it has TBD. I mean, unless someone's edited this page in the last 2 days, this is what it looks like. I wrote this slide in January, and I was like, okay, cool. I have a sprint on Sunday. Let's make it my personal challenge to get edit access to this page because I've been working with it. And well, I threw that out the window because I have bigger fish to fry. But maybe you can convince me otherwise. There'll be another Saturday. I'll deal with that. So going back to type data and entities, I found there's one complex data type that's not an entity, and that is the map type data. So what is the map? It's basically a glorified associative array. So think of our info file, our info hooks. We have all Drupal loves associative arrays, and map is pretty much the way of describing associative arrays in Drupal 8. If you're thinking of a data type. It's not really an associative array because it's a class. It provides us all these cool getters and setters, and it has the type data system, which allows for a lot of validation and constraints. So I was like, okay, I don't want an entity. We'll use map. So how do I go about doing this? And so now I'm going to go ahead and show you some code here. And the answer to this is plugins. So like a lot of things in Drupal 8, type data are plugins. And so it's got a plugin type. We're describing a data type. And it's got the familiar plugin ID and labels. And this is pretty much my payment class, which describes an invoice can have payments attached to it. So it's a payment that's coming in from AR or accounts receivable. The other thing is that with a relatively primitive data type like a string, it's really easy to describe it. It's just you've got one thing that you're doing. You're attaching a string. Your data is a string. But with a complex data type, you need to define it, what that complex data type includes. So that's what this definition class is. So all complex data types need the definition class, if I recall correctly. And then we look at this code, we see this function called getPropertyDefinitions. And then the function body is this definition, getPropertyDefinitions. And it feels like I'm at Disneyland, and I'm in the teacup ride, and I'm just going get property definitions, and then get property definitions, and get property definitions. And then the gory, I'll spare you the gory details of the teacup ride and the after effects of that. But type data API has a lot of this recursion, and it can be confusing when you're looking at code, because that's the only thing you can look at, no documentation, that it's calling these same method names over and over. And you're like, am I looking at the definition, get property definitions, or am I looking at the data type, get property definitions, or am I looking at the plugin managers, get property definitions? Actually, I think it's a different name. But the same thing applies to a couple of method names. All right, let's move on from this recursive stuff. So a data definition, again, is describing the complex data type, and it allows you to define for each property in your complex data type. And if you're thinking of an associative array for each key, you can add things like labels, constraints. A constraint, it comes from Symfony. They have a constraint system, so each constraint is allowed values, or a mathematical constraint, a date constraint. So that's reusing the Symfony 2 constraint system. Actually, when I began this sojourn into the rabbit hole, data definitions were actually arrays, and now they're classes. You don't have to worry about that anymore. So my payment definition is going to describe other data types that it includes. So a payment is attached to an invoice, so I can say use the Xero invoice data type, and I can say use the Xero account properties. And it's not the data, if you look at the create method, it's a create method on the definition class, but I'm passing in the data type. So when you're creating the property definitions, you need to know the data type plugin ID, and the data definition class uses that to derive the definition class for a data type. Again, we're kind of going teacup ride here in terminology. So this is my payment definition, and so that's relatively simple. You can just like go down and do that. And there's some shortcuts that we can use now that I'll get into a little bit. The other cool thing about type data is that there's a list data definition. So a list data definition is not just a single data type. It describes a series of the same data type. So an array, an indexed array, basically an indexed array of your data types. And this is great for me in my use case, because Xero API as a RESTful API returns things as basically an indexed array of items. So the first element of the XML is accounts, and then you have an account element underneath that. And that's going to come in handy later on when I'm actually using the type data. But all this data definition stuff and creating it on yourselves leads me to my mad tip of the day. And in 2015, we now have this GitHub project called Classify, I think probably is the way to pronounce that, or Classy PHPI, something. So Eclipse GC of Drupal fame wrote this application that helps you to create definition classes. And it generates the definition classes from associative arrays. And it uses this just from a cool PHP perspective, and this is why PHP is fun. It uses this other library called Farbarus to do it. And the way that Farbarus works is you traverse the code, the PHP code, like a DOM, like you're an HTML page, and then you can take a specific line, or not just a line, but a specific piece of PHP code and translate it into something else. So that's why it's taking the associative array and basically translating it into your definition class. The extra bonus mad tip of the day is that Farbarus also is how the Drupal module upgrader module works, in that it takes Drupal 7 PHP and turns it into Drupal 8 PHP when possible. But I'm kind of digressing. So with that said, I've got my data types, and that I kind of just had to go out and bang them out and get all the data types I needed for Xero, that correspond to the Xero types. So now I need to work on how to use type data. So the thing there is I'm gonna be serializing and deserializing the type data, the data types, so that I can send them off to Xero or receive them from Xero. So the normalizer class is what handles part of this, and it is a part of the serializer component. So you're never really invoking normalizer yourself. You're invoking serializer on XML or JSON, and then serializer is going to come in and normalize the data or denormalize the data. One of the things that I found with normalization and the normalizing classes in Symfony, it has this context parameter, and it's very confusing because I'm not sure what context means. But I mean, it's kind of obvious to me now, but context is what you make of it. So Drupal context has a very specific meaning, whereas in other classes it might be completely different. So it's kind of just this parameter that gets passed around. And again, the type data manager being recursive and confusing was confusing to me. So the other thing I discovered and when I was working with is the normalization classes. Probably going to, if you're doing something like I'm doing and doing map and doing my own thing that's on entities, it's really a good idea to start defining your own normalization classes. And so if you're not familiar with the service YAML, here's an example of a way to define your own normalizer service. It's one of the services that also have a tag component to tell Symfony some extra information about what this is and how it fits in. So it is a normalizer tag. And this is the normalizer I came up with, which right now is just a denormalize function. I actually haven't gotten to normalizing. So it's pretty straightforward. The denormalize function, again, it takes the data that we're incoming data that we're getting from the API, and that's already been, if it was XML, it's already been translated into an array, and then it takes a class with which to do the where was I? Okay, yeah, a class for the data type, and then the format is optional, and it has this context parameter, which I was talking about. The context parameter really just takes the plugin ID of the data type, and Drupal needs, the type data manager system needs to know the plugin ID in order to instantiate that class. So one of the things with Xero I needed to do was, since I get this basically an index array of XML elements I don't know exactly, I wanted to store the element name, so that's where this plural name stuff comes from. And really my invocation of the type data API is in this latter portion where it says this type data manager. create list data definition of the plugin ID or of my data type. So if I was getting accounts, my plugin ID would be 0_account. And then I create the list definition class, and then I pass that into the create method of type data manager with my data, and that's going to return an array of, or not an array, an iterator of accounts. So an iterator, so it's like basically an array class. And that's how, and then we can use that, the getters and setters available in type data to get specific things. The other issue I found with type data, it has to do with testing. I'm really enjoying unit tests because they're awesome and fast, but type data manager is big and scary. Type data calls itself, so mocking is not as straightforward as it is for other things in Drupal or Symfony or any other framework. And I need to mock the service container, which you're really not supposed to do. And I'm struggling right now with finding what exactly is necessary to have decent coverage, and in order to look at my complexity of my code so I can reduce that complexity. What's really cool about PHPUnit is I can see this visually. I have pretty coverage and complexity graphs. And if you're not familiar with the output of PHPUnit coverage, it looks like this. I think there was a session yesterday that did this. I like seeing the pretty colors and seeing where I'm lacking tests. So when I go back to testing my data definition classes, it's really just a single method called getPropertyDefinitions, and it calls all these core functions. So it's pretty easy to create a test for that just says, hey, you have coverage, because it's just calling this one function in the output with known output. But I'm not sure, and this is a question for later that the group might want to answer, is if I really do need to assert some of the values in that data definition, if I'm really just calling core functionality, which should have coverage in cores tests. So if we go back again, kind of going back to that definition class, and what I just said is I'm just calling data definition create static methods and shoving them in an array. So the data definition core class probably has tests that already do this, that test that yes, the create method works, the set required method works, the set label method works, the set constraint method works. So kind of going back to my tests, we have to mock type data. And normally it's pretty. There's actually some cool functionality in PHPUnit that allows you to mock classes and when you mock classes, you're just taking out the middle chunk of a method and saying, I know what my parameter is going to be, I know what my return result is going to be. I don't care about the logic. It's a black box because it's not my code; it's someone else's code. I can just say I'm depending on that code not changing. But normally when you use mocks, you have that single known value for complex data types. But with type data, it's being recursive in a sense. We have to reconstruct the order of how type data is calling itself, and that means if I have this complex data type, I need to. And I have all these complex properties. So like if we look at that invoice, that payment definition has an invoice. The invoice has a contact. The payment also has a contact. So when it goes through those methods, I need that mocked class needs to know exactly the steps to create it. And an example of this in core of what I'm talking about with it calling itself is when the type data manager has a create instance method, And it's basically going to call create instance on the definition class. And the type data manager is going to do this for every definition that it's trying to instantiate. So again, you have to know, if I'm going to take away the meat of this by mocking it, I'm going to take away the meat of this function and return different values in the correct order. So that gets kind of hairy pretty fast. So an example of mocking here is the first thing you do is you call get mock builder on the class name and the namespace, and you can disable the constructor, and then you get back this mocked object. And then, hopefully if you have a mocked class that just returns one kind of thing, you can say will return, or with the parameters, and it will return what we're expecting. So this is an example. Core does this a lot in PHPUnit. You can find examples in Core that's very similar to this. If you look in the unit test for type data, that's pretty much what it does. But again, we get into complex problems, and this is a simple example of what I'm talking about. Is for, let's say I have a phone number data type, and I need the area code, the country code, and the number, and they're all stored separately as properties. And so the first thing with this mock here is getting the parameters. So I have an anonymous function that returns the correct parameters that in the order that they're going to be called. So I have to know this in my test. And then for my return values, I have the same thing. On consecutive calls, we'll return the definition classes, the string classes up there. Actually, not definition, the data type classes for strings. And that's how you mock type data. And I'm not sure, seems like a lot of work for something like invoice, which has to go through all those properties, if I wanted to do these asserts on specific properties. Lastly, you have to mock the container. So there's a way of doing that in new container builder, and you can inject the type, the services that you need into your mocked container. I don't really want to talk about mocking the container, and I've just shown you like 4 slides in a row of code. So I'm just going to, I wrote a poem about that. What I learned not to do, I resigned myself to that fate. Besides, Core does it too. So please do not hate this container so small is not actually in my app at all. I do not load nor invoke the container directly to get variables in my code. I use dependency injection, actually. So forgive the misuse I leverage. All I want is pretty coverage. So you might be thinking to yourself, why in the world, after running after this white rabbit as type data, would I ever want to use it? Well, I think that type data helps us to use Drupal 8 effectively. So by doing the data types, I'm doing good practice, best practice for dependency injection. My code's better. And I'm also exploring ways of reusing code from Core and off the island. So, the Symfony 2 bundle that I found that does this, or Guzzle. So an example of this code, it's probably not the perfect code, but it doesn't depend on the container in the worst ways. So I have a settings form, and in Drupal 8, we have methods for building out form arrays now. And hopefully you're injecting your dependencies via the container injection interface or the static create method, which I'm not showing. I'll show in another slide. So yeah, so here is my use of type data. I've translated my Xero query into a service that then constructs the Guzzle, invokes the Xero client extension of Guzzle, and it has that Xero query method as an API service allows me to set methods and types of data so that I can just call execute and get a list of accounts, because the accounts are iterable array classes from thanks to type data and list data definitions. I can iterate over them in a for each. I can then use getters to get the specific properties I want. So an account, I want to get my account code and get the value of that. So this is very similar to entity metadata wrappers, if you're familiar with those in Drupal 7. And then I can construct the options array and then put them in a form array. And so this is one way I'm using one way that type data is useful to me. And the other is just a quick little delve into that query method. So in my constructor, I'm able to use dependency injection. So the Xero client is that Guzzle, that third-party library that extends Guzzle client, which I probably should update to Guzzle 5, but I'll stick with what I have right now. I'm injecting the serializer service, the type data manager, and a log the new watchdog service, basically. So doing some good practice there. And then that execute method pretty much I have some custom code in this thing that basically kind of acts like a database query, but for Guzzle stuff, for Xero, very specific to the Xero module. And again, all it's doing here, my use of type data is in this serializer component. This serialize my data in the format of XML with the context of whatever data type I'm doing for this query. And that's the body, sorry. And then the deserialize is from my response data and then returning the response data there. So in summary, type data I think is very useful, and its strong typing is useful for RESTful APIs, whether it's accounting, educational APIs, Twitter, Facebook. I think that this is something that is going to be of use to us as for custom modules and development. Like what I'm doing. A lot of the normalization stuff is done for you if you use entities. It's complex, as we've seen, but it is still powerful. It's difficult to test. But what else? I think I'm going to open up the floor now to ask, discuss, or share your type data uses, including entity adopters, which is how entities are using type data now, or questions about what I've been doing, maybe some other Drupal 8 APIs you might want to talk about, and then I have some links to the session here. So to do this effectively, I think we want to, if you have a question, you could probably just do it like this, but if you want to share something, we probably want to come up here and speak into the mic, or speak this way at least, so that your voice is captured by the recording. Maybe do like stage things or whatever, like in theater. So I guess, does anybody have any questions or want to share anything? Yes.
In one of your examples, I think where you were setting the component properties of the invoice complex data type, you were setting things like maybe name, maybe amount, and then a date. And the date seemed to be a string type data property, and that stood out to me as odd, because it seems like there's so much work going on here to get really specific about data types, and date seems like a normal example for where you get more specific than string.
So in the question that Steve had is, in one of my examples, I have a date property, and it's actually I'm defining it as a string. So why, if dates aren't there are many ways of describing dates, and you could probably do that in a better way. So I was looking to answer that. Yeah, yes. I was looking at Core, and Core provides a date time ISO 6108 class, I think, or data type. But Xero really depends on just the date in that instance. So I might, and a very specific way. And so I didn't, when I was using that, I think there were two reasons I didn't. And one was that it was depending on fields in a way. There was a case of that. The other thing was that it was date time related. And so I decided to stick with strings in that case. And that's the reason. But yeah, I completely understand you. That's the reason I didn't use Core's date time type.
So what would you say is the main advantage of going through type data and building up all that structure versus just using just a one-off class that you just made up?
I think the advantage is that it fits right in with all these other Drupal 8 components. So if sorry, let me repeat the question. What is the advantage of using type data and building out all your properties instead of just using a one-off class?
Yeah.
And you were going to say something else.
Yeah, what specific benefits are there? Is it can you look into different Drupal 8 things?
So what are the specific benefits of using type data? So the one that I described was serializer, and serializer, and the way that Drupal uses serializer is with type data. You're passing these data types around and serializing and deserializing them. So integration with third-party APIs. And then also what I think, and this is what I'm hedging my bet on, is that we have rules module. Now rules module in Drupal 7 had some really tight integration with entity API and entity metadata. And I'm betting that it's going to use type data, and that it should use type data. It should be those data types that you select in your rule selectors, that those would all become data types. And that by exposing my plugins as data types, I can get rules integration for free, essentially, or close to as free as possible. And then beyond that, I'm really hoping, I have these procedural functions which are with a giant stupid switch statement about creating little former API snippets. I'm really hoping that that with data type and data definitions that we could create forms from data types automatically. And I think this is an opportunity. I mean, I think rules could do that as well when you're automatically build out forms based on if you have a date data type and you choose that in your set, create a date or create a value or create a variable action, and then it populates the form automatically. So I think by using type data, you can take advantage of things that other people will be developing because you're using the Drupal 8 components. Larry.
So another use for it that I've been told exists is for panels in Drupal 8 and similar systems that need more information about a piece of data than its compile type. Things like what node bundle is something, not just as a node class. And so that kind of information needs to be captured somehow, and straight up PHP classes don't do that.
I think everyone was able to hear that. I'm not sure if it got caught by the recording, but another specific example that Larry mentioned is he was told that type data can be used, or probably be necessary and used by panels to, I think, the equivalent of the panel's context, where based on, a panel's context is in Drupal 7 is you create is like a data type that you can use and tokenize and use the tokens for. Oh, there's another specific example, tokens. Because we're using type data, we can get the properties. We know the properties. We can get token values and the tokens for a specific data type.
So you just mentioned 3 subsystems in Drupal 7 that are overlapping, but not overlapped as much as they could be. The entity metadata that rules module uses, token, which kind of overlaps but not completely, and then C-tools contexts, which all want the same thing, which is a better way of understanding the metadata about a node or entity. They should just be able to use the same thing, and now they actually can.
Yeah, so Steve clarified for the recording, if it's not clear from whatever, is that that panels and token and rules all kind of are trying to solve the same problem of how to get the metadata or the tokens for using it in site building, and that they should be using, or probably should be using, the type data API and describing and how to get data types in Drupal 8. Is that right?
Yeah.
Any more questions? Interpretive dances. There we go. We got an interpretive dance. I think we can end now. Thank you for sharing your ideas, and yeah, hope to see you tomorrow. And there's the joined in link. Hopefully that links to feedback. I wasn't able to log in earlier to add the specific link.